General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow's descent into darkness was not sudden, but rather a slow and calculated erosion of everything that once tethered her to reality. The crumbling of her marriage to Drew didn't merely break her heart, it fractured her identity, exposed the hollowness of the life she had been desperately clinging to, and stripped away the illusion of control she had worked so hard to build. In the aftermath of the failed wedding, whispers around Port Charles grew louder, full of judgment, pity, and unspoken truths. But Willow heard none of them. Her mind was elsewhere, retreating into a singular obsession, quietly preparing for a move that would redefine her entire existence. She would vanish, not just from the chaos, but from the expectations, the eyes, and the guilt. And in doing so, she would reclaim something the world tried to take from her, power. The location she chose was no coincidence. It was the cabin Isaiah had once mentioned in passing, a rustic, isolated structure gifted to him by Lucky. Deep in the woods and untouched by the noise of Port Charles. During a seemingly casual conversation, Isaiah had confided in Willow that the place had become a financial burden, in need of repairs. A quiet dream he was holding onto for a future family. But Willow, hearing those words through the prism of her own desperation, had already begun weaving the cabin into her escape plan. As Drew's lies unraveled and the affair with Nina was exposed, Willow's humiliation was complete. Her public image, once pristine and tragic, was now fraying under the weight of betrayal. But more than Drew, more than Nina, it was Michael and his children who began to haunt her thoughts. Michael, the man she once considered the center of her world, had already drifted emotionally. Their separation had been painful, yes, but it was his children, Wiley and Amelia, who represented everything she had lost. Willow had once been a mother to them in spirit, bound by blood and love. But that identity had slipped away without closure. And now, as she stood at the edge of her own emotional abyss, she began to view those children not with tenderness, but with obsession. They were no longer just Michael's children. In her mind, they were hers. They were symbols of the life she was denied, pawns in a game she was no longer willing to play by anyone else's rules. The move to the cabin was silent and methodical. She told no one. Not even close friends, not even family. She packed slowly, deliberately, collecting things that felt important, old photographs. Drawings made by Wiley, Amelia's baby blanket. She avoided surveillance, used burner phones, manipulated her digital footprint. By the time anyone realized she was gone, she had already disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the silence of Isaiah's forgotten retreat. The cabin itself was unfinished, drafty, and unfit for long-term living. But for Willow, it was perfect. It was untouched. Unseen. A blank canvas where she could start again, not as the broken bride or the discarded woman, but as something else entirely. Something stronger. Something willing to do whatever it took to reclaim her children. At first, the solitude was cleansing. Willow thrived in the quiet, away from the looks of pity, the probing questions, the constant reminders of failure. She would wake before dawn, bathe in the cold stream nearby, gather wood, write long letters in a journal she never intended to send. She imagined conversations with Wiley and Amelia, moments she would create when they were finally back in her arms. But those fantasies, at first innocent, slowly began to shift. She no longer imagined Michael joining them. She no longer saw herself co-parenting or reaching a mutual understanding. Instead, her visions became possessive, distorted. She imagined hiding with them permanently, removing them from the toxicity of Port Charles, raising them in the woods away from the influence of liars and manipulators. She imagined becoming the only mother they would remember. The psychological transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Willow began speaking aloud in the cabin, first to herself, then to the imaginary versions of Wiley and Amelia. She created routines for them, meals they would hypothetically enjoy, games they would play in the forest clearing. She convinced herself they were already with her in spirit, that it was only a matter of time before they arrived. She rehearsed what she would say if Michael came looking. She began crafting defenses in case anyone tried to take the children back. In her mind, the cabin had become not only a sanctuary, but a fortress. And she was its guardian. Meanwhile, in Port Charles, her absence became a crisis. Drew, still reeling from the wreckage of their failed wedding and the exposure of his betrayal, refused to speak publicly about her disappearance. Michael was stunned by how sudden it all seemed, by how quickly Willow had faded from view. He assumed she needed space, but as the days passed with no messages, no updates, no trace, that assumption transformed into fear. Nina, too, began to unravel, guilt twisting her thoughts. Her role in the affair, once buried in rationalizations, now stood out in sharp relief. And Isaiah, upon returning to check on the cabin and finding signs of recent occupancy, wood freshly chopped, ash in the fireplace, curtains drawn, realized with horror that Willow had used his trust as a doorway into something far more dangerous. Back at the cabin, Willow's delusions were deepening. She began collecting food, clothing, even toys, preparing for the children's eventual arrival. Her journals were filled with elaborate plans, homeschooling curriculums, escape routes through the woods, strategies for avoiding law enforcement. She believed Michael would try to stop her, that Drew would lie to keep the children away, that Nina would manipulate the courts to destroy her completely. And so, she planned not just for protection, but for retaliation. She began to see herself not as a mother in hiding, but as a warrior protecting her legacy. The possibility of violence became real when she retrieved an old hunting rifle Isaiah had left stored in a locked cabinet. She cleaned it, learned how to use it, justified it as a measure of safety. But deep down, something darker was stirring. The children were no longer just in danger of being taken from her, she now believed they were in danger because of the people around them. And if anyone threatened to bring them back to Port Charles, to drag them back into the lies, she would do whatever was necessary to stop it. As winter crept in and snow began to fall, the world outside grew more suspicious. Authorities began investigating, pressure mounted, and whispers about mental health, custody battles, and secret hideouts swirled. But still, no one could find her. Holly, sensing something deeper beneath the chaos, began following her instincts. She had always trusted her gut, and this time, it led her toward Isaiah, toward the cabin, toward the truth. But even she did not understand just how far gone Willow had become. The final act is coming, and it will not be quiet. Willow is preparing for confrontation. She believes the world is coming for her and the children. She believes Port Charles has labeled her insane, dangerous, unfit, but she also believes she is the only one who can protect what truly matters. And so, she waits, in that forgotten cabin, not with fear, but with purpose. Not broken, but reborn. This isn't the Willow who once clung to peace. This is someone transformed by betrayal, isolation, and the haunting certainty that only through retreat and retaliation can she regain what was taken from her. The cabin is no longer a hiding place, it is the heart of a reckoning. And when she finally steps back into the light, it may be too late for Port Charles to stop what she has become. The quiet presence of Isaiah, once perceived as a supporting figure in the chaos surrounding Willow, is now emerging as a far more complex and calculating force. Beneath his soft-spoken demeanor and carefully chosen words lies a web of strategies, quiet manipulations, and long-term visions that suggest he may not simply be a bystander to Willow's breakdown, but an architect influencing its trajectory. The more one examines Isaiah's recent behaviors, the clearer it becomes that he is deeply embedded in a series of adjustments, tactical, emotional, and possibly strategic, that are quietly reshaping the path ahead for Willow. His decision to reveal the existence of the cabin, seemingly innocuous, now appears to be the first deliberate step in a broader design, one cloaked in concern but laced with intent. That cabin, initially framed as a generational dream, was offered into conversation at a moment when Willow was unraveling, and Isaiah knew it. The timing of his conversation with Willow was not accidental. It occurred at the very moment she was beginning to fracture under the weight of Drew's betrayal, when the truth about Nina and the collapse of her marriage left her vulnerable, unguarded, and desperate for escape. Isaiah's recounting of the cabin's story, its isolation, its lack of surveillance, its history as a quiet refuge, was not just conversation. It was a seed. And Willow, in her fragile state, absorbed it fully. Whether Isaiah intended for her to flee there or simply sensed she would, the outcome is the same. He placed the idea in her mind. And then stepped back to let it grow. Now, as Willow isolates herself deeper into the cabin's confines, convinced of betrayals and preparing for conflict, the question emerges. What exactly is Isaiah doing? Is he an ally, or is he quietly monitoring the collapse for his own purposes? His absence in the immediate aftermath of Willow's disappearance speaks volumes. He did not alert the authorities when he noticed signs of occupancy. He did not confront Willow. He did not warn Michael or Drew. Instead, he withdrew. As if waiting for something, or someone, to act first. That calculated silence is not the action of a man caught off guard, but rather a man watching a plan unfold. If Isaiah is indeed orchestrating adjustments behind the scenes, then Willow is now a pawn in a much larger equation. And the consequences of that manipulation are beginning to materialize. Trapped in a structure both physically remote and psychologically isolating, Willow is losing touch with reality. Her fantasies of reclaiming Michael's children, her weaponization of memory, her slow descent into paranoia, all of it is unfolding within the very space Isaiah made available. If he wanted to break her, or test her, or shape her trajectory, he could not have chosen a more perfect setting. But why would Isaiah do this? What does he stand to gain? It is possible that his goals are not tied to Willow alone, but to broader shifts within Port Charles. By quietly altering the stability of one character, especially someone as emotionally interconnected as Willow, he may be preparing for more widespread disruption. The cabin becomes a pressure point. A catalyst for emotional explosions that will ripple through Michael, Nina, Drew, and the fragile alliances holding the town together. And if Isaiah is the only one who knows the full truth, he gains power not through confrontation, but through knowledge, through positioning himself as the only one who can fix what is about to break. As Willow drifts further into delusion, unaware that her retreat may have been orchestrated, she also finds herself more vulnerable than ever. She believes she has found refuge, but in reality, she may have walked into a trap designed to fracture her identity completely. If Isaiah visits, if he offers supplies, comfort, or validation, it will only deepen her dependence. He becomes the only voice she trusts, the only figure who seems to understand. That kind of power, the power to guide the unraveling of a person's mind while appearing to offer support, is subtle, terrifying, and deeply calculated. This new phase places Willow in immediate psychological danger. Every action she takes inside that cabin is now framed by a reality crafted by Isaiah's initial manipulation. If he continues to adjust the narrative, gently guiding her choices through suggestion or silence, he becomes the unseen force controlling her descent. The most haunting part is that Willow may never realize she is being influenced. She believes she is acting out of clarity, reclaiming her life, protecting her children. In truth, she is acting inside a scenario that Isaiah quietly prepared, and the further she goes, the harder it will be to escape. This marks one of the most profound narrative shifts Port Charles has seen in years. A man once dismissed as peripheral is now potentially the puppet master behind one of the show's darkest psychological arcs. And if Isaiah is truly strategizing this collapse, then what he does next will determine not only Willow's fate, but the future of everyone connected to her. The adjustments he's implementing are no longer subtle. They are deeply destabilizing. And if left unchecked, they could trigger a wave of emotional destruction far greater than any one character can survive. Willow's isolation is not just a reaction, it's a symptom. And Isaiah may be the hidden cause. In the shadows of the once familiar Port Charles, a storm of psychological terror is silently forming. And at its heart stands Willow, a woman no longer tethered to the moral codes or emotional clarity that once defined her. Shattered by betrayal, humiliated by a broken marriage, and twisted by isolation, Willow has crossed an invisible threshold, evolving from victim to architect of chaos. No longer content with fantasizing about motherhood, safety, or redemption. She is now ready to act. And the act she has planned is both unthinkable and inevitable. She will take the children. Not one, not two, but all three, Daisy, Wiley, and Amelia, as part of a chilling delusion that only in her care can they be safe, pure, and free from the web of lies spun by those she once trusted. What began as retreat has metastasized into obsession. The silence of the cabin has become an echo chamber, feeding Willow's growing detachment from reality. She sees visions of herself raising the children away from the corruption of Port Charles, where Drew, Michael, and Nina play dangerous games behind gilded smiles. In her rewritten version of truth, the children are not safe in their current lives. They are prisoners of deceit, victims of emotional neglect. And so she has convinced herself that removing them isn't kidnapping, it's rescue. The plan is simple in her mind, elegant even: isolate, extract, protect. She will infiltrate their routines under the guise of concern. She will manipulate any residual trust she still holds in Michael's orbit. And when the moment is right, she will disappear with them into the same remote sanctuary Isaiah once revealed to her, the cabin, long forgotten by others but now transformed into her idea of Eden. But Port Charles is unprepared for the madness that is building. The town has seen betrayal, death, and lies before, but what Willow brings is different. It is a slow, calculated unraveling of sanity that wears the mask of maternal instinct. She still smiles. She still speaks softly. She still talks of healing and clarity. And that is what makes her dangerous. No one sees the panic coming. No one expects the woman who once embodied grace to suddenly weaponize motherhood. But when the children vanish, the illusion will shatter. The kidnapping will shake every household. Daisy's disappearance will send Sasha into a spiral if she returns. Wiley and Amelia's sudden absence will shatter Michael. Rip apart the last threads of stability between him and Drew, and throw Nina into a tailspin of rage and guilt. Questions will surface: how could this happen? Who enabled it? But perhaps the most disturbing realization will come later, that Isaiah may have known, may have even orchestrated part of it. Isaiah, calm and methodical, has been playing a longer game. He positioned himself as a friend to Willow, as a man of peace, as a man who once opened up about a cabin and his vision of legacy. But as the chaos explodes, another narrative will rise, the possibility that Isaiah never merely offered Willow sanctuary, but rather offered her a stage. A place to hide, to plot, and now, to imprison. The children may not just be in Willow's care, they may be held under conditions Isaiah has control over. Because behind the curtain of his kindness lies a man who understands influence. Who understands the power of emotional leverage, and who may now be using this crisis to establish a new kind of power in Port Charles. While search parties race through snow-covered woods and the Corinthos estate descends into panic, Isaiah remains oddly still. He offers to help. He suggests theories. He speaks as a voice of reason, but he knows far more than he says. He may be Willow's silent partner, or he may be her keeper, waiting to see if she collapses under the pressure or fulfills the vision he quietly nurtured in her. Either way, he holds a piece of this puzzle. And as the town turns inward trying to locate its missing children, Isaiah's name will inevitably emerge. Too many coincidences. Too much foresight. Too much access. Willow, meanwhile, lives in her new reality. Inside the cabin, she sets the table for 4. She sings lullabies to Daisy. She tells Wiley stories about bravery and how he must protect his sister from bad people. She brushes Amelia's hair and tells her she is the most perfect child in the world. In this twisted sanctuary, Willow is no longer the woman who cried at the altar or who lost her place in Michael's life. She is a protector, a mother, a savior. And in her delusion, the only thing she fears is being stopped. So she builds defenses. She prepares escape routes. She watches the tree line. Anyone who comes for the children will be met with force, psychological, emotional, or worse. The longer the children remain hidden, the more desperate the town becomes. Portia breaks down under pressure, fearing her connection to Drew's scheme may have fueled Willow's break. Nina accuses Drew of triggering the spiral with his betrayal. Michael begins unraveling, blaming himself for not seeing the signs. And beneath it all, Isaiah observes. He offers calm, he offers words. But inside, he calculates. Because in chaos, he finds opportunity, the opportunity to become indispensable. If he orchestrated this with Willow, then he holds the power to end it. If he didn't, then he now holds a key to rising in influence by solving the very madness he may have allowed to thrive. Either way, he wins, and that is what makes the story truly chilling. The obsession, the madness, the abduction, it all flows toward a single truth. Port Charles is no longer in control of itself. The city, once anchored by its heroes, has become the playground of a broken woman and a quiet manipulator. Willow, once the picture of purity, is now the embodiment of obsession. And Isaiah, once a gentle outsider, is now at the center of a storm he may have helped summon. The children, caught in the middle, are more than victims, they are symbols of innocence exploited by madness and ambition. And unless someone sees through the calm lies, the unspoken motives, and the hollow reassurances, this story may not end with rescue. It may end with revelation, and ruin. Willow's descent into darkness has become more than a personal tragedy, it has grown into a contagion of destruction, spreading across Port Charles and leaving behind it a trail of broken bonds, psychological wreckage, and irreversible losses. In the shadow of her unraveling mind, two names stand out as the most devastating casualties, Robert and Daisy. And for Sasha, their deaths are not just unbearable, they are unforgivable. Once a woman clawing her way back to light after years of trauma and grief, Sasha is now forced to relive her worst nightmares. Triggered not by chance or fate, but by the deliberate actions of someone she once called family. Willow, in her obsession and detachment from reality, has taken from Sasha the last two anchors she had in the world, and in doing so, has shattered whatever fragile hope remained. The death of Robert was the first devastating blow. For Sasha, Robert had become a figure of strength, a mentor, a steady presence who helped her believe that justice and truth still had meaning in a world constantly spinning out of control. He gave her guidance when her mind faltered, gave her purpose when she no longer recognized her place in the world. His loss was more than emotional, it was spiritual. And even then, Sasha might have survived it, might have found a way to carry on. But what followed destroyed that possibility forever, the death of Daisy, her child, her light, her reason. A death that wasn't natural, that wasn't accidental, but rather the result of Willow's descent into madness and control. Daisy's fate remains a blur of tragedy. Whether it was a kidnapping gone wrong, neglect under Willow's delusions, or something far more sinister, the truth remains the same, Sasha's daughter is gone. And not just gone, but taken from her in the cruelest way possible. By someone she once comforted, someone she once tried to help. Willow, the woman who had once shared loss and grief with Sasha, became the very embodiment of her worst fear, a predator masked by innocence, a destroyer wearing the costume of a mother. Port Charles is shaken, but it is Sasha who is hollowed out. She does not scream. She does not weep in public. She simply disappears into herself, each breath heavier than the last. The streets feel colder, the faces less familiar. And the hospital walls that once meant healing now echo with pain. And so, with nothing left to tether her to the life she once rebuilt, Sasha makes a decision that is both quiet and final. She will leave. She will walk away from General Hospital, from the town that gave her a second chance and then stripped it away again. This departure is not about running, it is about surviving what can no longer be healed. Her exit becomes one of the most haunting in recent memory. There is no farewell party, no long goodbye. She leaves a single note in the locker room, a few belongings packed into a duffel bag, and then she slips away before the sun rises. Those who look for her find nothing. No forwarding address. No flight record, no last words. Sasha has vanished, not just from Port Charles, but from the storyline that once revolved around her healing. And yet, even in absence, she leaves behind a presence, an absence that haunts the town, that reminds everyone of what happens when compassion is twisted, when trauma is ignored. When one woman's unraveling is allowed to destroy another's rebirth. Willow may have thought she was reclaiming motherhood, but what she has truly done is reignite an ancient trauma in Sasha. One she may never recover from. The woman who once walked barefoot through the wreckage of addiction, who buried a son and still smiled at sunrise, has now become a ghost in her own life. The obsession now belongs to others, those left behind who can't understand how it all went so wrong. Michael, overwhelmed with guilt and horror, may never reconcile how Willow became the catalyst for such suffering. Nina, once a source of pain for Sasha, now stares into the mirror and sees a mother who enabled the fall of another. Drew is broken, Portia is silent, and even those who barely knew Sasha now carry the weight of her absence. This is the new trauma of Port Charles, the wound no one saw coming. It is not a shooting. Not a mob war, not a courtroom scandal. It is something quieter, more suffocating. A woman destroyed by the misguided madness of another. A child lost because the adults refused to see the signs. And a town forced to admit that its systems of care and protection failed in the worst possible way. And so, Sasha becomes legend. Not the tabloid kind, not the kind mourned in funerals and eulogies. But the kind that lingers in every silent hallway, every empty hospital bed, every glance exchanged in the nurse's hub. Her name becomes a whisper of guilt. A reminder of what should have been prevented. Her absence is the mirror of Willow's madness, the consequence of inaction. In the end, it wasn't Sasha's own demons that destroyed her. It was someone else's. And that truth, that final and chilling truth, is what Port Charles must now carry forward, knowing that its brightest survivor was swallowed not by her past, but by someone else's future.